Thanks so much for being here. Welcome back. You've acknowledged what we are all seeing right now, especially at the grocery store. Food prices much higher than what they have been. You've said you've been trying to stop price gouging. How do you do that effectively?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, we're seeing across the board just people are, like feeling the squeeze. They're getting pinched every which way, whether it's the gas, groceries, prescription drug costs. And some of what we're doing is trying to make sure that, while people are struggling, we're not seeing continued record profits for some of the largest corporations in the world, really. And we want to make sure that that folks aren't taking advantage of just that folks aren't getting taken advantage of, actually. And that's, again, everything from groceries to things like prescription drugs, making sure that Medicare can negotiate prescription drug prices.
Right. The Inflation Reduction Act, which I know you supported, capped insulin costs at $35 a month. Do you support other price caps outside of the healthcare industry?
Well, I think we'd have to take a real hard look at what any provisions that looked at capping prices for other things outside of, the Medicare program is literally the largest purchaser of prescription drugs in our country, and the ability to cap something like insulin, which has existed for over 100 years, is not seeing new innovations, is saving tons of lives across the country, and making sure that Medicare can negotiate the prescription drug prices is, I think, one of the best ways to not just save lives, but also save taxpayer dollars.
The last time we spoke, you had just made it onto the House Agriculture Committee,
oh, yeah.
Hoping to represent more of your rural constituents because the map had changed. What has come of that?
Oh, man. Well, a couple of things. I've learned a ton. I forgot that I had just gotten onto the Ag Committee the last time you and I saw each other. The Farm Bill reauthorization is, we're really in the heat of it. This is something that happens every 5 years, or is supposed to. In anticipation of working on the Farm Bill, I went around to every part of the new 3rd District and got a chance to visit with ag professionals, whether it's farmers, producers, ranchers, livestock auctions. I went to a livestock auction. I didn't buy anything. But I learned a ton and was able to work on a couple of specific provisions on the ag side. And now we're in the process of doing the hard work of bipartisan negotiation, because the Farm Bill is one of those pieces of legislation that traditionally is bipartisan. Here in Kansas, folks like Bob Dole and Pat Roberts have been leaders in that space for a long time. So I'm just hoping to continue the learning that I'm doing, but also making sure that we actually get a Farm Bill done. I'm hoping that we see that when we get back at the end of the year.
Sure, and quite a few farmers in the we say newly, but 2 years ago, redrawn districts.
Yeah.
How has that changed the way you campaign to appeal to progressive and maybe more conservative leaning voters?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't feel like the day-to-day approach has changed. The substance of what I'm working on, because I'm on the Ag Committee now, certainly that is a bit different, but it's a lot of trying to literally show up every single place I can. If folks invite me somewhere, I try to make it out. I'm just one human, but I try to go to every single part of the district and sit down with folks. The Farm Bureau has, when I first got onto the Ag Committee and was trying to figure out, where do I go? Who do I talk to? How do I learn about this stuff? There was a bunch of Farm Bureau folks who really stepped up and invited me to farms, to processing plants, to all kinds of things to make sure that I actually understood the substance of what they're dealing with every day.
What do you believe is the #1 issue facing Kansas voters? And how would you affect it?
We kind of talked about it a bit. I think that a lot of folks are really, again, just struggling, and this is, it's something that hits almost every single family, whether you're, my mom retired a couple years ago from the Postal Service, and she's on a fixed income, and when things go up, she feels it, and I know tons of other people do too. And then I would say, at the same time that folks are talking about inflation and costs, and though, I'm trying to do as much as I can to bring those costs down, folks are also worried about, the federal government infringing on our freedoms when we talk about reproductive rights, and, the fact that Kansas voted in a bipartisan and pretty overwhelming way to say we don't want politicians involved in our healthcare decisions, including abortion decisions.
Are you worried that there could be a proposal for a national ban?
Absolutely, and I say that because we saw it in this session of Congress. At the very beginning of this session of Congress, there were proposals and bills that I voted no on, but every single one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle has voted in ways that would, frankly, endanger the protections that we have here in Kansas and go against the will of the voters in Kansas. And this is one area where I have to say that my opponent is very out of step. He's aligning himself with all of the extreme voices on the other side of the aisle in D.C. that have introduced bills that would cut against the will of the Kansas voters.
Your opponent has also said securing the southern border is one of his top priorities. What do you believe needs to be done? Biden administration has had almost 4 years to deal with it, and there have been issues. So what needs to happen down there, and what would you do if elected to a fourth term?
Yeah, there absolutely have been issues, and I think to pretend otherwise is it's not honest and it's not fair to the voters. I have been one of the House members who have pushed back against my own party on this. We got to make sure, one, that we acknowledge what needs to be done, and we're a sovereign country. We have to have secure borders. I have voted to increase funding to make sure we've got not just the manpower but also the technology, and then I would say that some of the most concerning stuff that I've seen has been the kind of political gamesmanship or partisan bickering. I was actually looking forward to the House taking a hard look and negotiating on the bipartisan immigration reform bill that was making its way through the Senate, and for the former president to say, don't take that up right now because it's better to have it as a campaign issue, that's exactly the kind of stuff that people are so frustrated with, and given what you just said, that I have an opponent who has indicated this is a top priority, I was surprised and a little bit shocked to see him falling in line with that political gamesmanship and saying he wouldn't have supported that piece of legislation. I think what the Kansas Third wants and deserves is a representative who's going to take a hard look at these issues. And I can't say for sure what would have happened if that bill had come over to the House, but I can say I would have done everything I could to try to get to a yes on a piece of legislation that's the first meaningful effort toward addressing the broken immigration system, the first meaningful piece of legislation since I've been in Congress to have bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform. And that's the kind of way that I operate. I'm trying to figure out how do we actually get some of these important issues addressed.
How do you break through that partisanship? Because that is, as a minority in the House.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It is kind of hard when you've got, there are some very extreme voices in the U.S. House. Right now with the Republican conference, some of those extreme voices, because it's a thin majority, have been able to really slow things down, are doing things like keeping the government open should not be used as a bargaining chip. We need to have real policy arguments and discussions. We also need to keep the government open. And I think that what we're seeing right now is, frankly, a bunch of just literally bickering. I keep my head down. I get to work. I try to do everything I can to find ways to work with folks. You know, if it's going to be good for Kansas, things like the Postal Service. I mean, I can only imagine you are hearing about the Postal Service issues that folks are facing. Our Republican Secretary of State has brought this up. Jerry Moran and I have worked together on trying to address issues that the Postal Service is having. I've worked with Jake LaTurner on issues around housing. Housing is a huge issue for a lot of people. Mark Alford and I joined forces to work on a bill that passed out of the Small Business Committee and off the House floor to help make sure that veterans who want to be small business owners or entrepreneurs have access to the resources that they need. And it doesn't mean that I agree with every single thing that Moran or LaTurner or Alford. I don't agree with them on all the policy matters, but if it's going to be good for Kansas and it's going to be good for our veterans and our states, then yeah, I'm going to work with them on that. And I think that that's part of why, part of why I've been able to get elected and get reelected. And it's what I plan to continue to do, no matter who's in charge, whether it's Democrats or Republicans in the House or the Senate or the White House. There's always things that you can do to find ways to work with the other side of the aisle.
Congresswoman Sharice Davids, thanks for your time.
Thank you.